Anne Marion pushed open the door to Suite 4502, exhausted after her third double shift. The system said it was vacant. Steam billowed out. Through the fog, she saw him, a man in nothing but a towel, water dripping from dark hair, intense eyes locked onto hers. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." She tried to flee, but he caught her wrist. "Wait, I need something from you. Name your price, one night." Anne's breath caught. Flashback, her sister Mia's hospital bed, the doctor's grim face. $500,000 for the experimental treatment. $500,000. His eyes flickered. "Done. But take this afterward." He handed her a pill. "For your protection." Hours later, morning light filtered through the windows. "How do you want the money? Bank transfer or cash?" "Bank transfer." Her hands shook as she wrote her account number. "Done. You'll see it in an hour." "Can I leave now?" He was already on his phone. "Whatever." She fled. 1 hour later, her phone buzzed. "Deposit, $500,000. Anonymous." 1 week later, Anne sat in a funeral director's office. Mia's treatment was working, but fear gnawed at her. "If the worst happens, I want her somewhere beautiful, with trees. We have a premium section, normally $50,000, but given your situation, $30,000. Anne signed. She visited the plot 2 weeks later, kneeling in the grass overlooking the city. A funeral procession arrived at the adjacent mausoleum. Black limousines, suited men, security guards, and an elderly woman in a wheelchair. A banner stretched across the entrance, "In memory of Charles Spencer, beloved patriarch." Anne turned to the groundskeeper. "Who are those people?" "The Spencer family. They own Whitmore Cemetery, owns half the city. Today's the anniversary of old Mr. Spencer's passing." Anne's stomach dropped. "The Spencer family owns this cemetery?" "Every inch. Charles Spencer bought this land 40 years ago. His grandson Ben runs everything now." The money she'd worked so hard to earn had ended right back in his pocket. Across the hillside, Ben Spencer stood at his grandfather's grave. His assistant whispered something. Ben's gaze swept the cemetery and landed on Anne. Recognition flickered. "What's her name?" Ben asked. The assistant checked his tablet. "Anne Marion, sir. She purchased Plot 47C last week." Ben watched her kneel at the empty plot, shoulders shaking. "Make sure no unauthorized visitors disturb my grandfather's peace." But he didn't look away. 3 weeks later, Anne's phone rang. "Hello, Ms. Marion. This is Julia Chen from Spencer Enterprises Human Resources. We received your application for an administrative assistant. When would you be available for an interview?" Anne nearly dropped the phone. "Spencer Enterprises? I'm available anytime. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., I'll email the details. Don't be late." The next morning, rain poured in sheets. Anne stood outside Spencer Tower at 8:45 a.m., soaked to the bone, her cheap umbrella destroyed. A Blacktown car pulled up. The window rolled down. "Get in." Ben Spencer sat in the back seat, impeccably dressed. "No need to trouble yourself, Mr. Spencer." "In this rain? Get in. You're wasting my time." Anne climbed in, dripping on the leather seats. He handed her a towel. "Wipe yourself off." Their hands brushed. Electricity. Memory. 1 million, 1 month, same arrangement. Anne's blood turned cold. "Mr. Spencer, I can't accept this." "Why not? You took the first payment easily enough." Anger flared. "Don't think that having money makes you superior or that you can trample on people's dignity." She unlocked the door. "Driver, please stop." The car halted. Anne stepped into the rain, head high. "Thank you for the ride." Ben's assistant turned. "Sir, should I?" "No, let her go." But Ben watched her walk away, spine straight despite the rain. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. She's really something. Inside, Anne dried off in the restroom, changed blouses, and fixed her hair. Julia Chen met her in the lobby. "Welcome to Spencer Enterprises. Our CEO rarely attends orientations, but as a new hire, you can't miss training." In the conference room, whispers followed Anne. "That's her. Started as a hotel maid, now suddenly here. Must have connections. Taking shortcuts." The trainer began. "Welcome to Spencer Enterprises." The door opened. Ben Spencer walked in, flanked by executives. His eyes scanned the room. Landed on Anne. The world stopped. "Miss Marion," he said coldly, "welcome to Spencer Enterprises." Every head turned. "I trust you understand our values? At Spencer Enterprises, we value merit. Taking shortcuts won't get you anywhere. I don't care who you know or what connections you think you have." The implication was clear. Whispers erupted. "The CEO knows her." He basically called her out. Ben turned away dismissively, but the damage was done. Anne sat frozen, shame and rage warring inside her. This was supposed to be her fresh start. Instead, she was trapped, working for the man who'd bought her body and now owned her dignity. And this was only the beginning. 3 weeks later, Anne Marion stood in the marble lobby of Spencer Enterprises, smoothing down the blazer she'd borrowed from her friend Keisha. The fabric was slightly too tight across her shoulders, but it looked professional. That was all that mattered. In her hands, she clutched the employee folder Julia from HR had mailed her. Benefits information, company policies, her official offer letter for administrative assistant in executive operations. She'd made it. A real job. A legitimate career. No more double shifts cleaning hotel rooms. No more dodging leering guests. No more scraping by on tips and minimum wage. And Mia. God, Mia was in remission. The experimental treatment was working. Her sister's last scan had shown the tumors shrinking. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Anne could finally breathe. That night in the hotel felt like a lifetime ago. A nightmare she'd locked away in a box at the back of her mind. She'd paid her penance, saved her sister, and now she was moving forward. Clean slate. Fresh start. The elevator doors opened on the 47th floor. Anne stepped into a world of floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist design. The executive suite. Polished concrete floors, glass walls, the kind of quiet that only extreme wealth could buy. A receptionist smiled at her. "Ms. Marion, Mr. Spencer is expecting you. Last office on the left." Anne's stomach fluttered nervously. She'd heard the CEO sometimes personally welcomed new hires in key departments. It was supposed to be an honor. She walked down the corridor, her heels clicking softly. The last office door was open. She knocked lightly on the frame. "Come in." That voice. Anne's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. She'd heard it in her nightmares for 3 weeks. She stepped inside. Ben Spencer stood behind a massive glass desk, backlit by the Seattle skyline. He wore an immaculate charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met. Recognition flashed between them like lightning. "Ms. Marion," his tone was arctic. "Welcome aboard." Anne's throat closed. "Mr. Spencer, I didn't know. This isn't what—" "Clearly." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She sat. Her hands trembled in her lap. Ben remained standing, towering over her. "Let me be direct, Ms. Marion. Spencer Enterprises has a strict policy against workplace relationships. I trust you understand." "Yes, sir." "Good. Because if I discover you're here for any reason other than work—" His eyes bored into hers with cold fury. "You'll find yourself unemployed and facing legal action. Do I make myself clear?" Anne's breath came shallow. He thought she'd come here to blackmail him, to trap him, to squeeze more money out of him by threatening exposure. I would never. That's what they all say. Ben turned away, dismissing her. Report to Julia in HR. She'll show you to your desk. Anne stood on shaking legs. Mr. Spencer, I swear, I didn't know this was your company. Dismissed, Ms. Marion. She fled. Down the corridor, past the receptionist's curious stare, to the women's restroom. Anne barely made it into a stall before she vomited. When the heaving stopped, she leaned against the cool metal wall, gasping. This couldn't be happening. She'd escaped that night. She'd moved on. And now she was trapped working for him, under his scrutiny, his contempt, his power. Anne wiped her mouth with shaking hands and caught her reflection in the stall's metal surface. Pale, drawn, terrified. And then another thought crept in, ice-cold and horrifying. When was her last period? Anne sat on the bathroom floor of her tiny apartment, 3 pregnancy tests lined up on the tile in front of her. 3 pink lines. 3 positive results. 3 confirmations of the nightmare she'd been trying to deny for a week. Impossible. She'd taken the pill. She remembered Ben Spencer handing it to her that morning in the hotel suite, his expression unreadable. For your protection, he'd said. Anne had kept the empty pill bottle. She didn't know why. Some paranoid instinct to have proof of something. Now she dug it out of her purse with shaking hands and stared at the label. The writing was small, clinical. She couldn't make sense of it. 20 minutes later, she stood at the pharmacy counter, the bottle clutched in her fist. The pharmacist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, took it from her and examined the label. "Excuse me," Anne's voice came out barely above a whisper. "What kind of medication is this?" The pharmacist adjusted her glasses. "These are prenatal vitamins, ma'am. Folic acid, iron, and B-complex. Standard supplement for women who are pregnant or trying to conceive." The world tilted. The fluorescent lights above seemed to strobe. Anne gripped the counter to keep from falling. "Not emergency contraception?" "No, definitely not." The pharmacist's expression shifted to concern. "Are you all right? You look pale." Anne stumbled backward. Prenatal vitamins, not Plan B, not protection against pregnancy, protection for pregnancy. He knew. He'd planned this. The memory crashed over her with brutal clarity. Ben's voice that morning, calm and controlled. "Take this. It's important." Not cold, calculating. His eyes watched her swallow the pill, a slight tension in his jaw. He'd known exactly what he was giving her. But why? Why would a billionaire CEO deliberately get a random hotel maid pregnant? Anne made it to her car before the tears came, violent and choking. Rage and betrayal and bone-deep terror all twisted together until she couldn't breathe. The next day at Spencer Enterprises, Anne moved through the office like a ghost. She kept her head down, avoided the executive floor, and took lunch at her desk. If she could just stay invisible, stay away from Ben Spencer, maybe she could figure out what to do. But fate had other plans. At 2 p.m., Julia from HR appeared at Anne's cubicle. "Anne, conference room C. Mr. Spencer called an emergency ops meeting." Anne's stomach dropped. "I'm just an assistant." "All ops staff, including assistants. Now." Anne followed Julia down the corridor on numb legs. The conference room was already full. Department heads, analysts, coordinators, and at the head of the table, Ben Spencer in a black suit, radiated cold authority. Their eyes met. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind the ice. Anne took a seat near the back, willing herself to disappear. The meeting began. Ben discussed quarterly targets, efficiency metrics, and restructuring plans. Anne tried to focus, but the words blurred together. The room felt too hot, too small. The walls seemed to press inward. Nausea rolled through her stomach in waves. And then the door opened. An elderly woman entered, elegant despite the wheelchair, with snow-white hair and eyes that missed nothing. The entire room fell silent. Ben stood immediately. "Grandmother, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see my grandson's kingdom." Her voice was strong, imperious. Her gaze swept the room and landed on Anne. "Child, you look absolutely dreadful. When did you last eat?" Every head turned toward Anne. Her face burned. "I'm fine, ma'am." "Nonsense. Benjamin, get this girl some water." Grandmother Spencer wheeled herself closer. "What's your name, dear?" "Anne Marion, ma'am." "Well, Anne Marion, come sit beside me. You look ready to faint." Anne started to protest, but another wave of nausea hit. She stood shakily and moved to the chair grandmother indicated. The older woman's hand reached out, ostensibly to steady Anne, but her fingers brushed Anne's stomach. Just a whisper of contact. The gesture was so maternal, so tender, that something inside Anne shattered. She burst into tears. Not delicate crying, ugly, gasping sobs that she couldn't control. The shame, the fear, the betrayal, the impossible situation. It all came pouring out. The room erupted in chaos. Ben crossed to them in 3 strides. "Everyone out, now!" The staff fled. The door closed. Silence descended except for Anne's ragged breathing. Grandmother Spencer's hand stayed on Anne's shoulder, gentle but firm. Then she turned her sharp gaze to Ben. "How far along is she?" Anne's head snapped up. "How did you—" "I've lived 83 years, child. I know pregnancy tears when I see them." Grandmother looked at Ben with an expression Anne couldn't read. "She's pregnant. With your child, I assume?" Anne expected denial, expected him to throw her out, to accuse her of lying, of trying to trap him. Instead, Ben's jaw tightened. His eyes met Anne's, just for a second. And she saw something that looked almost like regret. "Yes." Grandmother Spencer gasped. Then her face transformed into a smile so fierce and triumphant it was almost frightening. "Excellent!" She clapped her hands. "You'll marry her immediately." "Marry her?" Ben's voice went cold. "Grandmother, that's absurd! Then I'll have my heart attack right now." Grandmother clutched her chest dramatically. "The doctor said one more shock could kill me. Your choice, Benjamin." Anne stared between them, her mind refusing to process what was happening. Marriage? To Ben Spencer? This couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare. But grandmother's hand was still warm on her shoulder. And Ben's expression, beneath the ice, looked trapped. Just like hers. That evening, Anne found herself sitting in Ben Spencer's penthouse, a sprawling space of glass and steel perched 60 floors above the city. The view should have been breathtaking. Instead, all she could see was the man across from her and the lawyer beside him, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy suit who'd introduced herself as Margaret Chen. The contract sat on the coffee table between them. 27 pages. Single-spaced. Anne was still reeling from the day, from Grandmother Spencer's ultimatum, from Ben's cold acceptance, from the way he'd looked at her when his grandmother left, not with warmth, but with the calculating assessment of someone measuring an asset. Margaret flipped to a tabbed section. "Let me outline the key terms. The marriage will last 18 months, terminating on the child's first birthday. You'll live together in this residence and present as married in all public settings. Upon successful completion, you'll receive $10 million. Anne's head spun. $10 million. More money than she'd ever imagined. "There's an absolute secrecy clause," Margaret continued. "If you breach confidentiality in any way, speaking to media, discussing the arrangement with friends or family, posting on social media, you forfeit all compensation and face legal penalties." "Legal penalties?" Anne's voice came out hoarse. "Breach of contract, Mr. Spencer takes his privacy very seriously." Ben sat in the armchair across from her, silent, his expression unreadable. He'd changed from his suit into dark slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked relaxed, casual, like they were discussing a business merger, not her entire life. Anne turned pages trying to focus through the legal jargon. Then she reached Section 7, Custody Arrangements. Her hands started shaking. In the event of contract termination or breach, primary physical custody of the minor child shall default to Benjamin Marcus Spencer, with visitation rights to be determined. "You can't just take my baby." Anne looked up, her voice cracking. "Our baby," Ben corrected, his tone ice cold. "And I can, unless you fulfill the contract." "This is insane." "This is business, Ms. Marion." Anne stood, the contract falling from her lap. "You deliberately got me pregnant. You gave me prenatal vitamins instead of emergency contraception. You planned this, and now you're threatening to take my child if I don't play along with your... My what?" Ben stood too, and suddenly the space between them felt charged, dangerous. "My attempt to give my grandmother what she wants before she dies? My effort to ensure that the child has every advantage? You came to me desperate for money, Ms. Marion. I gave it to you. Now I'm offering you 10 million more and a life of security. What exactly are you objecting to?" Tears burned Anne's eyes. She hated that he was right. She'd sold herself once already. What was 18 months compared to Mia's life? Compared to giving her baby everything she'd never had? A soft sound made them both turn. Grandmother Spencer sat in her wheelchair near the entrance, and Anne realized she'd been there the whole time, listening. "Child," Grandmother said gently, wheeling closer. "I know this seems harsh, cruel even, but Benjamin needs a wife. I need to see my great-grandchild before I die. And you—" Her eyes were kind but knowing. "You need security. Isn't this better than struggling alone, raising a baby in poverty, always one disaster away from losing everything?" Anne thought of Mia, of the medical bills still mounting despite the remission, of her one-bedroom apartment with the leaking ceiling and broken heater, of working double shifts while pregnant, of giving birth alone, of choosing between diapers and rent. $10 million would change everything. It would give her baby a life she could never provide on her own. "Where do I sign?" The words came out barely above a whisper. Ben slid the pen across the table. Anne reached for it. Their fingers touched, just for a second, and electricity sparked between them. His eyes met hers, and for just a moment, she saw something beneath the ice, something that looked almost human. Then he pulled away. "One more thing." His voice dropped lower. "We share a bed. Grandmother has spies everywhere, staff, security, and even the building doorman. This has to look real." Anne's stomach lurched. "You can't be serious." "I don't make the rules, Ms. Marion. I just enforce them." She wanted to argue, wanted to tear up the contract and walk out. But Grandmother was watching with those sharp, knowing eyes, and Ben's expression made it clear. This was non-negotiable. Anne signed. 2 hours later, Anne stood in the master bedroom of Ben's penthouse, clutching the small overnight bag she'd been allowed to pack from her apartment. The room was enormous, all clean lines and expensive furniture. A king-sized bed dominated the space, its white linens crisp and untouched. One bed. "I'll sleep on the couch," Anne said, her voice small. "No." Ben entered behind her, already unbuttoning his shirt. "We do this right, or not at all. The staff does morning checks. They'll know if the bed isn't slept in by 2 people. He pulled his shirt off, revealing the lean muscle she remembered from that morning in the hotel. Anne turned away, her face burning. "I can't." "You can. You will." His voice softened slightly. "I won't touch you, Miss Marion. I'll stay on my side. But we share this bed. Those are the terms." Anne heard him move to the bathroom, heard water running. When he emerged in sleep pants, she was still standing frozen by the door. "Left side or right?" he asked. "What? Which side of the bed do you prefer?" The absurdity of the question, the domesticity of it in this nightmare scenario, almost made her laugh. Or cry. She couldn't tell which. "Right," she whispered. "Fine, I'll take the left." Ben pulled back the covers and climbed in, as casual as if they'd been married for years. Anne changed in the bathroom, her hands shaking so badly she could barely button her pajama top. When she finally emerged, Ben was already lying down, his back to her side of the bed. She climbed in, staying as far from him as possible. The mattress was enormous, but it still felt too small, too intimate. The lights went out. Darkness enveloped them. "Good night, Miss Marion," Ben said into the silence. Anne stared at the ceiling, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach where her baby was growing. Ben Spencer's baby, the baby that had trapped them both in this gilded cage. "Good night," she whispered back. And somewhere in the darkness, she could have sworn she heard him sigh. 2 weeks into the contract marriage, Anne learned that working at Spencer Enterprises while secretly married to the CEO was its own special hell. The whispers followed her everywhere. The knowing looks. The barely concealed contempt from executives who thought she'd slept her way into her position. But the worst was Victoria Kane, Ben's ex-fiancée, VP of Operations, a stunning woman with ice blonde hair and a smile that could cut glass. She made it her personal mission to make Anne's life miserable. "She baby-trapped him," Victoria said loudly in the break room, surrounded by her circle of admirers. "Poor Ben. Probably thought she was on birth control. Now he's stuck with her." Anne kept her head down, made her coffee, and left. Fighting back would only make it worse. But Victoria wasn't satisfied with words. Late Friday night, Anne sat at her desk finishing reports when Victoria's assistant Jenna appeared, young, ambitious, with calculating eyes that reminded Anne of her boss. "Hey, Anne, Ben needs the Q3 reports from the server room. Can you grab them? He's in meetings until midnight and needs them first thing tomorrow." Anne glanced at her computer screen. It was already 10 p.m. "Can't it wait until... He specifically asked for you to get them." Jenna's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Said something about you needing to prove yourself. You know how he is." Anne's stomach tightened. She did know how Ben was, demanding, exacting, always testing. And she needed to prove she wasn't just the woman he'd been forced to marry, that she could actually do this job. "Okay, where exactly?" "Basement level 3. Server room B. The reports are in the filing cabinet, labeled Q3 Operations. Can't miss it." Anne rode the elevator down, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The basement was deserted at this hour. Just the hum of machinery and the distant sound of HVAC systems. The server room door was heavy, industrial, with a keypad entry. Jenna had given her the code. The room was massive. Rows of server racks, blinking lights, and cold. So cold. The temperature displayed by the door read 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Anne shivered, wishing she'd brought her cardigan. She found the filing cabinet and started searching through folders. Behind her, she heard the heavy door swing shut. Then, click. The lock is engaging. Anne's head snapped up. "Hello, Jenna?" No answer. She crossed to the door and pushed. Locked from the outside. She tried the keypad. Access denied. "Jenna, the door locked. Can you hear me?" Silence. Anne pulled out her phone. No signal. The server room was a concrete vault, designed to be impenetrable, climate-controlled, secure. No one could hear her, and no one knew she was here. She checked the temperature display, 38 degrees Fahrenheit. As she watched, it ticked down, 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Someone had manually overridden the thermostat, setting it lower. Much lower. Panic clawed at her throat. Anne pounded on the door, screaming until her voice went hoarse. "Help! Someone help me! I'm locked in!" Hours passed. The cold became unbearable. Anne's fingers turned white, then blue. Her breath came in visible puffs. She curled on the floor against the door, arms wrapped around her stomach, trying to keep the baby warm. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Somebody." Mia's voice echoed in her memory, from weeks ago, when Anne had visited her in the hospital before everything changed. "Annie, you deserve better than this. Don't settle for a man who doesn't see you." Tears froze on Anne's cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mia. I failed us both. She was going to die here. Her baby was going to die here. And Ben would never know she hadn't abandoned him, hadn't broken the contract. She'd just been stupid enough to trust the wrong people." Anne's eyes were closing when she heard it, shouting, heavy footsteps. Then an explosion of sound as the door burst open. Ben Spencer stood there, his face white with fury, coat already off his shoulders. He wrapped it around her and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. "Who did this?" His voice was lethal. Anne's teeth chattered so violently she could barely speak. Victoria!" "Call an ambulance," Ben barked to someone behind him, "and get building security footage from the last 4 hours. I want to know everyone who knew she was down here." He carried Anne to his car, ignoring the gathering crowd of security guards and late-working staff. His hands were shaking, the first time Anne had ever seen him rattled. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Stay awake. That's an order, Miss Marion." Anne woke in their bed, disoriented. Morning light filtered through the windows. Ben sat in the chair beside the bed, still in last night's clothes, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "The baby?" Anne's hand flew to her stomach. "Fine. The doctor checked. You're both fine." His hand started to reach for hers, then stopped, hovering in the space between them before retreating. "Victoria Kane is fired. So is Jenna, and anyone else who was on that floor last night. Security footage shows Jenna manually lowering the thermostat and jamming the door lock." Anne's throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." Ben's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath the ice, something that looked like fear. "No one touches what's mine." The words should have sounded possessive, cold. Instead, they sounded like a promise. Anne spent the next week recovering in the penthouse, doctor's orders. Ben insisted she take time off work, and for once, she didn't argue. Her body ached. The cold had seeped into her bones, and the baby, though fine, needed rest. What surprised her was that Ben stayed home too. Working from his study, he emerged every few hours to check on her, bringing her tea, making sure she ate. The attentiveness felt strange coming from the man who'd been so cold, so transactional about everything. Late one night, Anne couldn't sleep. She wandered through the dark penthouse and saw light spilling from Ben's study. He sat at his desk, staring at a document, his expression haunted. "Ben? Can't sleep?" He looked up, startled. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he held up the document. "I had your doctor run a paternity test when you were in the ER after the server room." Anne's blood turned cold. "Why?" "Because I needed to know." He handed her the paper. Bold letters, 99.9% probability of paternity. "I needed proof." Anne stared at the report, then at him. She should be furious, violated, but exhaustion had stripped away her defenses. "And? Are you satisfied now?" Ben stood, crossed to her. "No, I'm furious." "At me?" At myself. His voice cracked, the first real emotion she'd heard from him. I gave you vitamins, Anne, not Plan B. I told myself I was letting fate decide. But that was a lie. I wanted this. I wanted a reason to keep you. The confession hung in the air between them. Anne's breath caught. Why? Because when you walked into that bathroom, looked at me with those terrified eyes, and still said yes to save your sister. He cupped her face with both hands, and his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were raw, vulnerable. I saw something real, something I'd never bought before, something I couldn't own. Anne's heart hammered. Every instinct screamed this was dangerous, that letting herself feel anything for Ben Spencer would destroy her. But when she looked at him, she didn't see the ruthless CEO. She saw a man who'd sat awake all night watching over her, who'd carried her out of that freezing room, who'd deliberately trapped her in his life because he couldn't bear to let her go. She kissed him, not because of the contract, not because of obligation or fear or desperation, because she wanted to. His arms came around her, pulling her close. The kiss deepened, and this time when he lifted her, carrying her to the bedroom they'd been sharing like strangers, everything felt different. That night, they made love again. But this time, it wasn't a transaction. It was a confession, a surrender. Two people trapped in a gilded cage, discovering they didn't want to escape. The next morning, Anne woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Ben sat at the breakfast table, already showered and dressed. A small velvet box sat beside her plate. "What's this?" Anne asked, her voice still rough from sleep. "Your real engagement ring, not the fake one grandmother picked." Anne opened the box. Inside was a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds, her birthstone. Her breath caught. "Ben, we're not really... aren't we?" He met her eyes, and something in his expression made her heart stop. "After last night, after everything, aren't we?" Anne stared at the ring, then at the man across from her. The man who'd bought her body, trapped her with a contract, and threatened to take her child. The man who'd also saved her life, protected her fiercely, and just given her a ring that said he saw her. Really saw her. She didn't know how to answer. Didn't know what they were anymore. But when Ben reached across the table and took her hand, sliding the emerald onto her finger, she didn't pull away. And that, Anne realized, was answer enough. The Spencer Enterprises annual charity gala was held at the Four Seasons, in a ballroom dripping with crystal chandeliers and old money. Anne stood at the edge of the crowd in a borrowed evening gown, emerald green to match her ring, feeling like an imposter among Seattle's elite. She was there as Ben's guest, not his wife. The marriage was still secret, known only to Grandmother Spencer and the lawyer who'd drawn up the contract. Ben had insisted Anne attend, had sent the dress and a stylist to the penthouse, but he'd made it clear they would arrive separately, keep their distance, maintain the facade. Anne watched him across the room, surrounded by board members and investors, looking devastating in a black tuxedo. He caught her eye once, just for a second, and something passed between them. Then someone claimed his attention, and the moment was gone. "Enjoying the party?" A voice purred beside her. Anne turned. Victoria Kane stood there in a blood-red gown, her smile razor-sharp. "I didn't expect to see you here. Don't you need an invitation to these things?" "I was invited," Anne said quietly. "By whom, I wonder?" Victoria's eyes glittered with malice. "You know, Ben will make an announcement tonight. Something he's been planning for weeks. I thought you should know." Anne's stomach dropped. "What kind of announcement?" "You'll see." Victoria glided away, leaving Anne's heart racing. What was Ben planning? To end the contract publicly? To humiliate her? She'd trusted him after that night, after the ring, but maybe she'd been a fool. Maybe this was all part of some larger game. The clinking of a glass drew everyone's attention. Ben stood on the small stage at the front of the ballroom, microphone in hand. His eyes swept the crowd and landed on Anne. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have an announcement." His voice carried across the silent room. "Some of you know I'm a very private man. I don't discuss my personal life, I don't do interviews, I don't do publicity, but tonight I'm making an exception." He stepped down from the stage and extended his hand toward Anne. "Anne, would you join me?" Every head turned. Anne stood frozen, terrified. This was it. The moment he exposed her, destroyed her, ended whatever fragile thing had grown between them. But his eyes held hers, and in them she saw not coldness, but something that looked like courage. Anne crossed the ballroom on shaking legs. Ben took her hand, pulled her close, and faced the crowd. "Anne Marion is my wife. She's carrying my child, and anyone who has a problem with that can leave now." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers that rose to a roar, camera flashes from the press photographers stationed at the back. Anne felt exposed, raw, like every eye was stripping her bare. Victoria pushed through the crowd, her face twisted with rage. "You married the cleaning girl? Have you lost your mind? She's a nobody, Benjamin. She trapped you." "Security," Ben said, his voice cold as winter. "Remove her." Two men in suits appeared immediately, taking Victoria by the arms. She struggled, screaming obscenities, but they escorted her out. The doors closed behind her, muffling her protests. Silence descended. Anne braced for judgment, for the contempt of these people who'd never see her as anything but the hotel maid who'd seduced their golden boy. Then Grandmother Spencer, seated in her wheelchair at the front, raised her champagne glass. "To my grandson and his beautiful bride. May they be as happy as my late husband and I were." The spell broke. Applause rippled through the crowd. Not everyone. Anne saw disapproving faces, shocked expressions, but enough. Enough to matter. Ben's arm tightened around her waist. "Breathe," he murmured in her ear. "You're doing perfectly." The rest of the night passed in a blur. Introductions. Congratulations from people who'd never looked at her twice. Questions about the wedding, the baby, and how they'd met. Ben deflected most of it with smooth corporate charm, keeping Anne close. That night, as their car pulled up to the penthouse, Ben checked his phone and laughed. Actually laughed. "What?" Anne asked. "We're trending on social media. #1 topic worldwide." He showed her his screen. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire CEO marries working class Cinderella. Spencer heir on the way. From hotel maid to Mrs. Spencer, a modern fairy tale." Anne's face burned. "Ben, this will destroy your reputation." "Good. I was tired of it anyway." He pulled her close and kissed her, right there on the sidewalk in front of the building, in full view of the press photographers who'd followed them home. Camera flashes exploded around them. Anne should have been mortified. Instead, she kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into that kiss. Fear and hope and the terrifying realization that somewhere along the way, this had stopped being a contract and started being real. When they finally broke apart, Anne was breathless. Ben smiled, a real smile, rare and devastating, and took her hand. "Let's go home, Mrs. Spencer." They'd almost reached the building entrance when a black limousine pulled up to the curb. The door opened. An elegant older woman stepped out, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, her silver hair styled in a perfect chignon. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her life. Her eyes locked on Ben with laser focus. "Benjamin Spencer?" Ben's hand tightened on Anne's. Yes? I'm Eleanor Harrington. The woman's smile was cold as ice. We need to discuss your broken promise to my family. I believe you were supposed to marry my daughter. Anne's blood turned to ice. Behind Eleanor, another woman emerged from the limousine. Blonde, beautiful, with the kind of polished perfection that came from a lifetime of privilege. Eleanor's smile sharpened. This is Elise, your fiancée. Or have you forgotten? Ben didn't invite Eleanor Harrington inside, but she swept past him into the penthouse as she owned it. The blonde woman, Elise, followed with the practiced grace of someone raised in ballrooms and country clubs. Quite a view, Eleanor said, surveying the space with calculating eyes. Though I suppose Charles Spencer always did have good taste in real estate, if not in grandsons. Ben's jaw tightened. Mrs. Harrington, it's late. Whatever you have to say. Can't wait. Eleanor opened her designer handbag and pulled out a yellowed document, edges soft with age. She unfolded it on the coffee table. A marriage contract between the Spencer and Harrington families, signed by your grandfather Charles and my late husband Robert 25 years ago, when you and Elise were children. Anne moved closer, reading over Ben's shoulder. The document was real. Legal language, official seals, and 2 signatures at the bottom. An arrangement made before either Ben or this Elise woman had been old enough to understand what it meant. My daughter was kidnapped at age 3, Eleanor continued, her voice hardening. For 22 years we thought she was dead, but she's been found. She's home. And now you will honor your grandfather's promise. Ben's voice was ice. With all due respect, Mrs. Harrington, I'm already married. To a nobody. Eleanor's eyes raked over Anne with such contempt that Anne felt herself physically shrinking. A cleaning girl playing dress-up in borrowed designer gowns? Surely you don't intend to embarrass both our families with this charade. Annul it. Marry Elise. Fulfill your duty. The old shame crashed over Anne like a wave. She was right back in that hotel suite, selling herself for money, being exactly what Eleanor accused her of being. A nobody trying to claw her way into a world where she'd never belong. Ben's hand found Anne's, squeezing hard. Anne is my wife. That's not a charade. Elise stepped forward, and up close Anne could see she was stunning. Porcelain skin, blue eyes, the kind of effortless beauty that came from generations of good breeding. Her voice was honey-sweet, almost childlike. Ben, don't you remember me? We were best friends as children. You promised you'd wait for me. Something flickered across Ben's face, a memory surfacing. Anne watched him pale, watched recognition dawn in his eyes. Ellie, the name came out barely a whisper. Elise smiled, touching his arm. You remember. We used to play in your grandfather's garden. You said you'd marry me someday, that we'd always be together. Anne's heart plummeted. She could see it in his face. He did remember. This woman wasn't just some stranger with a contract. She was part of his past, woven into his childhood, someone he'd cared about. Eleanor's smile turned predatory. You have 1 week to annul this marriage and do the right thing. Otherwise, the Harrington family will bury Spencer Enterprises in lawsuits and scandal. We have resources, Benjamin, and we have patience, but we will not be dishonored. They left as dramatically as they'd arrived, Elise casting one last longing look at Ben before the elevator doors closed. Silence descended. Anne pulled her hand free from Ben's, wrapping her arms around herself. You loved her. I thought she was dead. Ben's voice was rough. She disappeared when we were 8. They found her body, or what they thought was her body. We had a funeral. But she's not dead, and you made her a promise. Ben grabbed Anne's shoulders, forcing her to look at him. I made you a promise. I'm not breaking it. But you want to. Anne searched his face, seeing the conflict there. You loved her first. You were supposed to marry her, and you're my wife. His eyes burned into hers. That's all that matters. But Anne saw the truth behind his words. She saw the boy who'd made a childhood promise, and she knew, with crushing certainty, that their fragile beginning was about to shatter. Eleanor Harrington didn't wait a week. She struck immediately, leaking details of the contract marriage to every major news outlet. By Monday morning, the headlines were brutal. Billionaire's sham marriage exposed. Real heiress waits in wings. Spencer CEO paid woman $10 million for fake wife role. Contract marriage scandal rocks Spencer Enterprises. The stock price dropped 12% in 3 hours. That afternoon, Ben's phone rang. His grandmother had collapsed. Chest pains. They'd rushed her to the hospital. Anne sat in the waiting room, numb. This was her fault. All of it. If she'd never walked into that hotel suite, if she'd refused Ben's proposition, if she'd disappeared after taking his money, none of this would be happening. When the doctors finally cleared visitors, Anne went in alone. Grandmother Spencer lay in the hospital bed, looking frailer than Anne had ever seen her, but her eyes were still sharp. This is my fault, Anne said, her voice breaking. I should leave. End the contract. Let Ben marry Elise. Your health... Grandmother grabbed Anne's hand with surprising strength. You are the best thing that has ever happened to my grandson. Don't you dare give up on him. But Elise is his destiny. The arranged marriage, the childhood promise. No. Grandmother's eyes blazed with fierce certainty. You are his destiny. I saw it the moment I met you. Don't let that Harrington woman convince you otherwise. Across town, Ben sat in an expensive restaurant facing Eleanor and Elise Harrington. Eleanor had demanded this meeting, and Ben had agreed. If only to end this nightmare once and for all. Elise reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. Ben, I know this is complicated, but we were meant to be together. Don't you feel it? That connection we had as children? Ben pulled his hand away. I feel nothing. Elise's perfect facade cracked. But we played together. You promised. I was 8 years old. Ben's voice was cold. People change. Promises made by children don't bind adults. Eleanor's face hardened into something ugly. Then you leave me no choice. I'll destroy you, your company, and that gold-digging wife of yours. The Harrington family has resources you can't imagine. Try it. Ben stood, throwing cash on the table. But I'm not leaving Anne. He walked out, leaving them both staring after him. That night, Anne packed a bag in the penthouse bedroom. Ben found her folding clothes with shaking hands. What are you doing? Leaving. Tears streamed down her face. Your grandmother is in the hospital because of me. Your business is at risk. Your reputation is destroyed. I won't be the reason you lose everything, Ben. I can't. Ben crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling the clothes from her hands and kissing her with desperate intensity. When he finally pulled back, his hands cupped her face. You are everything. Don't you understand that? The company, the reputation, the arranged marriage, none of it matters without you. Ben, I'm not letting you go. Anne wanted to believe him, wanted to think love could conquer Eleanor's threats and public scandal and childhood promises. But the next morning proved how naive that hope was. Eleanor Harrington stood before a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing, Elise beside her in a demure pink dress. I'm pleased to announce the engagement of my daughter, Elise Harrington, to Benjamin Spencer, fulfilling a promise made 25 years ago by our families. The wedding will take place in 6 weeks. Anne watched the press conference on TV, her hand pressed to her growing belly, and felt her world shatter. Anne sat in Grandmother Spencer's hospital room, watching the press conference on the small television mounted on the wall. Eleanor Harrington stood before a crowd of reporters, announcing Ben and Elise's engagement with triumphant certainty. The woman beside her, the blonde imposter claiming to be the lost heiress, smiled demurely for the cameras. Anne's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, where her baby was growing. Ben's baby. The baby that had brought them together and was now tearing them apart. "It's over," Anne whispered. "No." Grandmother Spencer's voice was surprisingly strong for someone who'd just had a cardiac episode. A mysterious smile played at her lips. "It's just beginning. Child, may I see your collarbone?" Anne blinked, confused. "My what?" "Your collarbone. Unbutton your shirt collar. Humor an old woman." Still bewildered, Anne unbuttoned the top buttons of her blouse, revealing her collarbone. There, just below her left clavicle, was a faint strawberry-colored birthmark. Small, shaped vaguely like a heart. Anne had always been self-conscious about it, usually keeping it hidden beneath clothing. Grandmother Spencer gasped, her eyes going wide. "I knew it. I knew from the first moment I saw you." She grabbed her phone with shaking hands. "Benjamin, get to the hospital, now, and bring that Harrington woman with you." "Grandmother, what? That birthmark, child. The real Elise Harrington had that exact birthmark. I saw it myself when she was a little girl playing with Benjamin in our gardens." Anne's world tilted. "That's impossible. I can't be. Can't you?" Grandmother's eyes were fierce with certainty. A woman with no memory of her childhood before age 5, raised by a mother who had no family photos, no documentation. You never questioned it? Anne's mind reeled. She'd always known something was off about her childhood. The way her mother, the woman she'd called Mother, had been evasive about the past. The complete absence of baby pictures. The way they'd moved constantly, always looking over their shoulders. "My mother saved me," Anne whispered. "From something. She told me that much before she died. But she never said from what." 20 minutes later, Ben burst through the hospital room door, his face flushed from running. Behind him, hospital security struggled to hold back Eleanor Harrington and the blonde woman claiming to be Elise. "This is a private medical room." Eleanor's protest died as Ben held up a hand. "Shut up, Eleanor!" He turned to his grandmother. "What did you find?" Grandmother pointed to Anne. Show them the birthmark." Anne stood on trembling legs and unbuttoned her collar again, revealing the strawberry mark. Eleanor's face drained of all color. She took a step forward, her hand reaching out as if to touch it, then stopping. That's impossible. You can't be—" "Is it impossible?" Grandmother turned her sharp gaze to the blonde woman. "Show us yours, dear. Show us the birthmark." The woman, the imposter Elise, stammered. I had it removed. It was embarrassing. I went to a dermatologist. The real Ellie loved that birthmark." Ben's voice was cold as winter, his eyes locked on the imposter. "She used to trace it with her finger and tell me it was a secret heart, proof we were meant to be together. She would never remove it." Eleanor's eyes darted between Anne and the blonde woman, doubt creeping across her features for the first time. "And there's one more test," Ben said. He pulled out his phone and called the hospital cafeteria. "Send up shrimp cocktail, 2 orders, immediately." "Ben, what are you doing?" Anne asked. Elise Harrington was severely allergic to shellfish. It's documented in her childhood medical records. Her mother kept them even after she disappeared, a severe anaphylactic reaction requiring an EpiPen. The blonde woman's face went pale. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. When the shrimp arrived, Ben held out the plate to the imposter. "Go ahead. Try one." My allergies went away as I got older. Then it should be no problem." The woman took a shrimp with shaking hands and ate it. Everyone waited. 30 seconds, a minute, nothing. No reaction whatsoever. Ben turned to Anne. Your turn. Anne's hand trembled as she reached for the shrimp. She'd never been tested for shellfish allergies, had simply avoided seafood because the smell made her nauseous. She placed the small piece in her mouth and swallowed. Within seconds, her throat began to close. Her hands flew to her neck as she gasped for air. The room spun. She heard shouting, Ben's voice, grandmother's cry of alarm, Eleanor's scream. Ben was there, EpiPen in hand from grandmother's emergency medical kit. He injected Anne's thigh with practiced efficiency. Slowly, agonizingly, her airway opened. She could breathe again. Call for a DNA test, Ben barked to the nurse who'd rushed in. Rush it. I want results in 4 hours, not 4 days. The DNA results came back at midnight. Ben sat beside Anne's hospital bed, holding her hand, as Eleanor Harrington stood across the room, her imposter daughter conspicuously absent. Security had already escorted her out. The doctor cleared his throat. The results are conclusive. Anne Marion shares 99.9% genetic markers with Eleanor Harrington. She is her biological daughter. Eleanor's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. My baby, my Ellie. I looked everywhere. For 22 years, I looked everywhere. Anne's mind struggled to process it. The memories were gone, locked away by trauma or time or both. But somewhere deep in her subconscious, she remembered. A little boy with dark hair. A garden. A promise whispered between children. I'll marry you someday, Ellie. The woman who raised me, Anne said quietly. She told me she rescued me from a bad situation. That she had to hide me. Was it true? Eleanor wiped her eyes. Your father, my late husband, he was not a kind man. He drank, he raged. One night She couldn't finish. Our housekeeper took you, disappeared with you in the middle of the night. I thought she'd kidnapped you for ransom. I never imagined she was saving you. The arranged marriage. The childhood promise. It had always been meant for Anne. The cleaning girl who'd walked into that hotel suite, desperate and ashamed, had been an heiress all along, destined to marry Ben Spencer from birth. Fate had just taken a messier path than anyone expected. The imposter, a woman named Sarah Collins, was arrested for fraud. She'd been hired by an investigator Eleanor had employed, someone who'd seen an opportunity to exploit a grieving mother's desperation. 3 days later, Anne stood on the penthouse balcony, her baby bump now visible beneath her loose sweater. Ben came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his hands resting on their child. So, Anne said softly, we were supposed to marry from the start. Fate's funny that way. Ben kissed her forehead. The cleaning girl who accidentally saw me showering was actually the heiress I'd promised myself to as a child, the woman I thought I'd lost forever. Do you regret the messy path we took? Not for a second. He turned her to face him and knelt on one knee. From his pocket, he pulled out a ring, an antique sapphire surrounded by diamonds. This was your grandmother's. Eleanor wanted you to have it? Anne's breath caught. Anne Marion Harrington, will you marry me again? For real this time? Not because of a contract or a grandmother's manipulation or an old arrangement, but because I love you. Because you're my fate, no matter what name you have. Anne laughed through tears. Yes, but I'm keeping Marion as my middle name. That woman saved my life. I won't forget her. Deal. He slid the ring onto her finger beside the emerald he'd given her weeks ago. 2 rings, 2 proposals, 2 beginnings. Sometimes the person we're meant to love is hidden in the most unexpected places. In a mortifying accident, a desperate bargain, a twist of fate. Anne walked into that bathroom thinking she was just a cleaning girl fighting for her sister's life. She walked out a wife, a mother, and an heiress. Because destiny doesn't care about your circumstances, your shame, or your past. Destiny only cares about your courage to say yes when love knocks, even when love arrives in the most impossible, complicated, beautiful mess imaginable. And as Ben kissed her on that balcony, the city lights twinkling below them and their baby growing between them, Anne knew one truth with absolute certainty. Some paths are worth walking, no matter how twisted they are. Because the destination, this moment, this man, this life, was always where she was meant to be.